Traveler, what can I do for you today? You've interrupted my coffee, which you need a horrible price now. Armor, weapons, they're all fine, but I think what you really need is a good story. A good book. I know, it's not what you're looking for, but hear me out, you might actually be surprised. There's a lot of good stuff out here lately. Maybe it's something that you don't know that you're actually looking for. How about that? You ready to hear me out? Good, let's go. If you go from the other side is a very interesting story. It follows two characters, a young girl called Shiva and an older being called Teacher, who is quote-unquote monster. That's to put it lightly. What he is and what he does and how he operates within the world is a little bit different and completely obscured by darkness. Now, this would be recognized by people, the everyday humans, as being a curse, and that if you come in contact with these beings, you yourself will be cursed, and they call them outsiders. So the world has kind of been torn into two different planes of existence. You have people trying to run and hide from this curse, calling themselves insiders, the beloved, the honored. They want safety. They don't want to turn into whatever Teacher actually is. Then on the outside is all of these creatures roaming this land looking for lost souls. Our main character Shiva is a young human girl who has been long abandoned by her family and friends and everyone that she ever loved. And because of this, Teacher has stepped into this role to take care of her. We don't really know why, we don't know how, we don't know what type of thing or person Teacher is, but just by his actions, by his thoughts, his compassion, he's a kind and caring individual. This is something that isn't naturally shown towards his creatures. They're curious, they're inquisitive, but sometimes a little bit malicious. They're ever living or immortal, but the way they view the world is not a reflection of who they once were. And I guess this would vary between every single aspect of whatever entity they are. Some can be big and massive, and others can be a representation of small birds. Teacher and Shiva live together. They roam this land trying to find some sort of normalcy, some sort of comfort, some sort of enjoyment that they can share with one another. And even though Shiva is young, she understands the kind of nuanced nature of what Teacher is. They can't actually come in contact, they can't touch each other, or the curse will go on to Shiva. This peaceful lifestyle that they have would be interrupted by a lot of different things, other entities or creatures, but also other humans. And this is where we would see the brutality of what this world has created and the divide between these creatures and humans and how they want to respectfully live in their own avenue. So much so that these humans are that scared that they will go through and completely devour and destroy an innocent town, village, or city because they think the curse has started there or that it's currently spreading there. All of this attention would interrupt the everyday lives of Teacher and Shiva, and they would have to find a way to navigate through it, to learn about each other, to understand themselves, but to understand the complexity of the world and to kind of operate within it successfully and safely together. See, Traveler, it's not too bad, it's rather interesting. Who needs armor and weaponry when you can have this type of story? But the real thing you want to hear is my thoughts on it, right? How did I go about it? I am the connoisseur of books. It's what I do on my travels, selling all of this stuff. I have a lot of time on my hands, so let me tell you how I feel about it. This manga surprised me in a lot of ways because it's very constantly recommended by people. Definitely more so over the recent years because it just came to a conclusion of March 2021. I was curious, and going into it, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know anything about it, and I came out pleasantly surprised. It's enjoyable, but there is some caveats within there that make the experience a little bit odd. See, this story may sound like it's filled with monsters and curses and turmoil all wrapped together within this beautiful fantasy aesthetic and world and land, but it's kind of anything but that. It definitely has the visual appeal of being some old school fantasy story, which is nice. It's very digestible, sometimes a little bit overwhelming in cases where lines of certain things and just all the ink being used blend together in a really odd way, so it might be a little bit confusing, but for the most part digestible. But the story doesn't really follow suit. It's a nice one, it's kind, it's enjoyable to kind of read through very effortlessly, but there isn't really anything there for you. I say this respectfully because the story is a slow one. It is a very slow burn into the relationship of Teacher and Shiva, and then understanding the curse, the world, the individuals operating within it, but it never gives you the full story. And that was not necessarily an issue that I had, but something that I kept noticing is that they would always build up to these answers and then would never give you the full answer. They give you like 80% of the answer, and then the last 20%, the most crucial part of that information, they wouldn't. And it's so crucial that you can't actually have a complete answer without it. So even though you already have 80%, this last 20 is so vital. They never do it. They never give it to you, they always shy away, they always cut it off. Any sort of interesting mystery or hook that they have going for it, they'll do the exact same thing. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this. Reading through it, I thought it was fine, but reminiscing back on it, a little bit different. Maybe it's because the overall reading experience is really nice and simple that you kind of just gloss over the quote-unquote problematic areas. For me, at least, that seems to be kind of what happened. I was just enjoying the journey of Shiva, enjoying the journey of Teacher, and them kind of understanding each other, and then all of these mysteries that kind of halfly get answered never really fueled me. And I guess that would go back into balancing this story out in some sort of appropriate way. You have all of these mysteries propelling the story forward, but surprisingly not as much as you would actually think. It's going to completely depend on yourself, the individual reading it, and whether you give this mystery more power than is actually needed. I was of the opposite. I didn't give much emphasis to these mysteries. I was curious, but it wasn't driving my thought process forward. I wasn't expecting it around every single corner. So when I didn't actually get the answers to those mysteries by the end of it, I wasn't all too disappointed, nor was it navigating me through sections of the story or characters. However, because it makes itself presentable in that way, you can become attached to them and be even more disappointed that you don't actually get any answers for a lot of things. Again, it's going to depend on yourself, so take your time with it. Don't become too attached to the mysteries. They're not really the vital focus of the story, but just flow through it at your own pace, and you can see the natural curvature of this storytelling experience, I would say. One that is very simple and ever-flowing and kind of just meant to be sat in there with the day-to-day life of both of these characters. I will say the author does a great job in putting two very different characters together and making them work extremely well. Emotionally, there is a little bit more to be desired. Over time, it starts to pick up and fuel itself further, and that's when you truly see the beauty of both of these characters. But because Shiva is a child, there's only so much you can do with her mindset and her emotions on a complex level. You can somewhat play around with it, but she's obviously very innocent to the world, so her understanding is going to be very limited. She doesn't know what she is and how to operate and why it's weird to be in the position that she's in. So unfortunately, you have to simplify a lot of that greatness. It's still great, don't get me wrong, just not to the extent that maybe you would want it to be. However, in return, you get a lot of that information and a lot of that value from Teacher, who is someone that is understanding himself, his connection to Shiva, the things he's willing to do for her, putting his life on the line constantly, or whatever form or variation of it you could count that as, and just wholeheartedly caring for her. He's not someone that shows much emotion, but when it comes to Shiva, if she's in danger, if she's hurt herself, if she's sick, if she's been away for too long, he gets antsy, he gets nervous, he gets worried. He has all of these feelings that swirl around that shouldn't actually be there because of the creature or the entity that he actually is. So more and more he's becoming human-like, and it's a very natural progression. It feels nice too, because what you don't potentially get from Shiva, even though she's a very lovable character, you get it from Teacher. So realistically, it's a very nice balancing act between them both. So artistically, the story is very pretty. It has that fairy tale-esque aesthetic to it, which is very indulging, meaning that you can kind of just get lost within the chapters themselves, just looking at all of these beautiful things. The way Teacher's drawn, the way the forest or the backgrounds are drawn, the way Shiva is very cutely drawn. There's so many great kind of components that meld into this art style to make it very visually just outstanding. And it's lovable, you can appreciate it, you can understand it, and it just flows you through the story at such a beautiful pace. It's comfortable on the eyes. There's only a small pocket of portions of it that meld a little bit too much together, and you start to get lost within a lot of the darker elements being used. Because Teacher is a dark entity or creature, when you clash that with a black background, there's not all too much separating them other than a thin white line. It's a little bit unfortunate because of how beautiful and crystal clear the artwork can be, so these moments definitely do stick out quite a bit where they're just a little bit too confusing, a little bit too much going on. It's not the end of worlds, it's not something that's going to make you throw the story across the room, but you'll probably notice it, that's for sure. Other than that, it's a beautiful experience. It has this eerie undertone to it, which I kind of like. It never really plays into that eeriness, but you know it's there, either from the way the creatures are moving or how the characters are interacting with one another or how the world responds to the characters. It always feels like it's setting up to something horrific or bad just around the corner, but that never actually comes. There is horrific moments, but the way they're set up is pretty more straightforward straightforward and you see that coming a mile away. It's never really used as a hook or as a surprise, but when it comes to characters and specific ones that you feel like should be nice or, have a relatively good relationship with one another, there's this sense of uncertainty that surrounds them, both artistically and narratively, and you kind of think the worst of them, that they could do something horrific and this would be the perfect time or moment to capture it. Again, it never actually happens, but the feeling is there. Overall, I had a pretty great time with this story. I don't think it's the best thing to ever exist, but I think it's fun. I think it's beautiful. I think it's very enjoyable. It has kind of an interesting story that's definitely more of a slow, methodical reading experience. So if you're not currently looking for something like that, if you're not looking for a story that doesn't have much emphasis or kick behind it, this might not be for you. However, if you want something that's a different change of pace, if you want something that's more fairy tale-esque, that has more of a moody atmosphere or approach to a lot of its components, this may be perfect for you. Quite a bit of material to go through, but because the dialogue is light, you'll fly through the whole story maybe within a singular day. Let me know if you end up reading it. Alright, traveler, I have sold you my wares. You now have this book and the knowledge of it, as well as my knowledge, which is obviously extremely, endlessly valuable, of course. Do not discredit it. I must venture on, spread this awareness to other people on the road. Hopefully, we meet again so I can share you my incredible wisdom of a lot of different stories that I'm currently reading. Wisdom's debatable, but regardless, I take my leave now. Goodbye.